Arrival on Zetra. David Arlen had always considered himself just an ordinary engineer, but that all changed the day he received an unexpected offer, a job that would take him far beyond the boundaries of Earth and into the depths of space. His new employer was none other than Zillerus Corporation, an interstellar conglomerate known for its advanced technologies and deep-rooted influence across multiple galaxies. When the opportunity arose to work on Zetra, an alien planet located at the heart of the Zillerus Empire, David couldn't resist. It was a dream assignment that promised to take his career to unimaginable heights. The first time he set foot on Zetra, he was awestruck. Towering skyscrapers of sleek silver and glass pierced the sky, and shimmering roads wound their way through the city like veins, pulsing with life. The planet was a hub of activity, home to a dizzying array of alien species, each contributing to the sprawling metropolis. From his vantage point in the transport pod, David could see the famous Zillerus headquarters, a monolithic structure that stood as a symbol of both power and technological prowess. Yet, as magnificent as the planet appeared, there was an unmistakable tension in the air. He could sense it from the moment he arrived, the rigid hierarchy that governed every aspect of life on Zetra. The Zillerus Corporation was more than just a business, it was a regime. Employees were expected to conform, to be efficient, and to serve without question. The pressure to excel was immense, and those who failed to meet expectations didn't last long. David had been assigned to work under Zarella, one of the highest-ranking executives within the corporation. Known for her icy demeanor and unparalleled intellect, Zarella was feared and respected in equal measure. Her reputation preceded her. She was said to be as ruthless as she was brilliant. As Xian, a humanoid species known for their sharp features and distinctive blue skin, Zarella commanded authority effortlessly. But there was something else about her, something David couldn't quite place. As David entered the Zillerus building for his first official meeting with Zarella, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The hallways buzzed with activity as employees hurried past him, data tablets in hand and holographic projections swirling around them. The air inside the building was cool and sterile, the kind of environment that demanded precision and productivity. He was led to a large conference room where Zarella sat at the head of a long metallic table, her striking figure bathed in the low glow of ambient lighting. Her blue skin shimmered under the light, and her piercing gaze locked onto David the moment he stepped inside. She was flanked by a group of her closest advisors, all of whom sat silently, awaiting her instructions. The tension in the room was palpable. "Mr. Arlen," Zarella greeted him, her voice smooth but cold. "You've made quite a name for yourself on Earth. Let's see if you can live up to your reputation here." David nodded, taking a seat across from her. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't disappoint." Zarella's expression remained unreadable as she glanced down at the data tablet in front of her. "Your first task will be to lead a team on the new energy initiative. We've encountered a few setbacks, and I expect you to resolve them quickly." Her words were firm, leaving no room for negotiation. David had heard rumors about the energy project. It was one of the most ambitious undertakings in the galaxy, designed to harness and redistribute energy across entire planetary systems. But it was also fraught with danger. Previous teams had failed, and there were whispers that the project had claimed more than a few lives. Still, David was determined to prove himself. "I'll get started right away," he replied, keeping his tone professional. Zarella's eyes narrowed slightly as if she were assessing him, weighing his worth. "See that you do." The meeting concluded quickly, and David left the room with a mix of excitement and unease. There was no doubt that this assignment would be challenging, but it was also a chance to make his mark on a galactic scale. What he didn't realize, however, was that his time on Zetra would not only test his engineering skills, but also plunge him into a dangerous web of corporate intrigue, power struggles, and an unexpected connection with his enigmatic alien boss. As the days passed, David threw himself into the project, working tirelessly alongside his team. The energy initiative was far more complex than he had anticipated. The technology was cutting edge, utilizing energy conversion techniques that were centuries ahead of anything Earth had developed. Despite the advanced systems, the project was plagued by instability. The energy grids constantly overloaded, threatening to destabilize entire regions of the planet. One night, after another long day in the lab, David stayed behind to review the data. The office was quiet, the other engineers having long since gone home. He was staring at a holographic projection of the energy flow when he heard a soft click behind him. Turning, he saw Zarella standing at the entrance, her sharp features illuminated by the glow of the holograms. "You're still here," she said, her voice neutral, but carrying an undertone of curiosity. "I needed more time to analyze the data," David replied, gesturing to the chaotic projections floating before him. "The systems are unstable, but I think I found a way to fix it." Zarella stepped closer, her eyes scanning the holograms with a practiced efficiency. "Go on." David took a deep breath. "The issue isn't just with the energy itself, it's with the way it's being distributed. We're trying to force too much power through too few channels. If we reroute the secondary grids and decentralize the flow, it should stabilize the entire system." Zarella considered his words for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Interesting," she finally said, "but can you implement it?" David met her gaze, feeling the weight of her challenge. "Yes, I can." For the first time since he had met her, Zarella's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. It wasn't a warm smile, but there was something in it, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps. "I'll be watching closely, Mr. Arlen. Don't disappoint me." With that, she turned and left, leaving David alone once more. But this time, he felt something had shifted. His connection with Zarella was no longer strictly professional. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, one that would soon grow into something far more complex and dangerous than either of them could have anticipated. As David stood there, gazing out at the shimmering city of Zetra through the window, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. What he didn't know was just how deep the ties between him and Zarella would run, and how far they would both go to achieve their goals. The price of ambition. The next morning, David awoke to the pale light of Zetra's twin suns filtering through the metallic blinds of his corporate apartment. His mind was already racing with the challenges of the energy project. The long hours and the immense responsibility were starting to weigh on him, but the memory of his late-night conversation with Zarella lingered like a slow burn at the back of his thoughts. There was something about the way she looked at him, the way she issued her challenges with quiet authority, that stirred something deeper within him, a mix of intrigue and caution. Zarella was unlike anyone David had ever encountered. On Earth, people in power often exuded their authority with loud bravado or by surrounding themselves with sycophants. But not her. Zarella's power was quiet, cold, and calculating. She didn't need to raise her voice or assert herself openly. Her very presence commanded the room. She was a master of subtle control, always pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And now David was certain that he had become part of her intricate web. After a quick breakfast, he arrived at the sprawling Zillaris Corporation headquarters, greeted by the usual bustle of engineers, scientists, and executives hurrying to their respective tasks. As he entered the main lab, he was met by his team, an eclectic group of humans and aliens, all of them highly skilled, yet looking just as tired and stressed as he felt. The energy project had been draining them all. "Morning, David," said Leora, one of the lead scientists, her silver eyes glowing faintly under the artificial lights. She was a Quenthari, a species known for their intelligence and dedication to research. Her pale skin and short, silver hair made her stand out even among the diverse group of employees on Zetra. "Morning," David replied, nodding toward the others. "Let's get started. We've got a lot of work to do if we're going to implement these changes." He explained the rerouting system he had proposed the night before to Zarella. The team gathered around a massive holographic display of the energy grid, and he outlined the plan to decentralize the power channels. As they debated the specifics, David couldn't help but notice the mounting pressure on all of them. Every decision carried the weight of possible failure, and here on Zetra, failure wasn't tolerated. "Are you sure this will work?" one of the junior engineers, Kailas, asked, his voice tinged with doubt. He was young, barely out of the academy, but eager to prove himself. "It will," David said with more confidence than he felt. "We don't have another option. If we don't stabilize the grid, the entire system could collapse." Kailas nodded, but his uncertainty remained visible on his face. Leora, however, backed David up. "He's right. This is the most feasible solution we've got. Let's get to work." As the team dispersed to their respective stations, David took a deep breath. The pressure was immense, but the excitement of tackling such a massive challenge fueled him. He dove into the work, losing himself in the endless calculations, data analysis, and system configurations. Hours passed in a blur of activity, and by the time he looked up again, it was already evening. David stepped out of the lab to get some fresh air. The sprawling city of Zetra glowed beneath him, an endless sea of lights stretching out into the horizon. It was a beautiful alien world, and yet David couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a sense of unease hanging in the air, a tension he couldn't quite place. As he stood there, watching the twin suns set behind the shimmering skyline, a voice broke through his thoughts. "You're working late again." David turned to see Zarella standing a few feet away, her blue skin illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights. She wore the same sleek, dark outfit she always did, and her piercing eyes seemed to see right through him. "Just taking a break," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. "We're making progress on the rerouting system." Zarella stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I expect nothing less." There was a pause, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was weighing her next words carefully. "But progress isn't enough, David. Success is the only acceptable outcome." David met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "We'll get it done." For a moment, Zarella said nothing, her sharp features unreadable. Then, without warning, her expression softened, just slightly, but enough for David to notice. "You've done well so far," she said, her voice lower now, almost personal. "Better than I expected, but I need to know something." David's heart quickened. "What's that?" "Why are you really here?" Zarella asked, her eyes boring into his. "You could have stayed on Earth, had a comfortable career with a fraction of the risk, but instead you chose this. Zetra, the project, me. Why?" David hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. The truth was, he hadn't fully understood why he had taken the job. The allure of working on cutting-edge technology had been part of it, but there was something else, something deeper. A need to prove himself, to push beyond the boundaries of what he thought he was capable of. But standing here, face to face with Zarella, he realized that his motivations weren't entirely professional. There was something about her, something that both intrigued and unsettled him. "I wanted a challenge," he said, carefully choosing his words. "Something that would push me to my limits." Zarella tilted her head slightly, her eyes gleaming with a hint of amusement. "You're ambitious. I like that." She paused again, the tension between them thickening. "But ambition comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" David felt a chill run down his spine. He had expected this job to be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated the layers of complexity that came with it, the corporate politics, the personal stakes, the subtle power struggles. And now, standing here with Zarella, he realized that he was in much deeper than he had ever imagined. "I've come this far," he said quietly. "I'm not backing down now." For a moment, Zarella said nothing, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for something. Then she gave a small nod, her expression unreadable once more. "Good. I'll hold you to that." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving David standing alone on the balcony, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He stared out at the city, feeling a strange mix of determination and dread. There was no turning back now. Over the next few days, David's team worked tirelessly to implement the rerouting system. The tension in the lab was palpable as the deadline loomed ever closer. Everyone knew that failure wasn't an option. The energy grids were unstable, and if they didn't fix the problem soon, the entire planet could be plunged into darkness, or worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the new system was ready. David stood at the central console, his hands hovering over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. Leora and the rest of the team stood behind him, watching anxiously as he prepared to activate the system. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Kailas asked, his voice barely a whisper. David took a deep breath. "We're about to find out." With a single tap of his finger, the system rolled to life. For a few tense moments, nothing happened. The energy readings on the holographic display remained erratic, the lights in the lab flickering ominously. Then, slowly, the numbers began to stabilize. The power grids realigned themselves, the energy flow smoothing out as the new system took hold. "We did it," Leora whispered, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done it. The energy project was back on track. But as the team celebrated their success, David couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There were bigger challenges ahead, and Zarella's warning echoed in his mind. Ambition comes with a price. Secrets beneath the surface. David's victory with the energy project was short-lived. As the rerouted systems stabilized, the excitement of the team slowly waned, replaced by the weight of the reality they faced. The success had come at a cost: long hours, mental exhaustion, and a nagging suspicion that their work was just a small piece of something much larger and more dangerous than they had anticipated. Zetra, with its glittering skyscrapers and advanced technology, felt like a perfect world on the surface. But beneath that shimmering exterior, David could sense a darkness that lurked within the walls of Zillaris Corporation. And the more time he spent in the high-stakes environment, the more he felt drawn into a complex web of corporate intrigue and alien politics that extended far beyond the simple tasks he had been hired to complete. In the weeks following the successful implementation of the new energy system, David continued to work closely with his team. Yet, something about his interactions with Zarella had shifted. She seemed to be keeping a closer eye on him, and their late-night conversations, always brief, but loaded with unspoken tension, had become more frequent. It was clear to David that she expected more from him now, but what exactly she wanted remained a mystery. One evening, as the lab grew quiet and the other engineers began to filter out, David found himself alone once again. He had developed a habit of staying late, partly because of the immense workload and partly because he needed time to think. The work was important, but there was something nagging at the back of his mind, a feeling that he was missing a critical piece of the puzzle. The energy system had been only one part of a much larger initiative, and he suspected that whatever came next would be far more dangerous. As he sat at his workstation, reviewing the latest data, the door to the lab slid open, and Zarella entered. David wasn't surprised. She had been appearing more often lately, always at the most unexpected times. She moved with the same fluid grace, her blue skin shimmering under the soft lights, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You've been working late," Zarella said, her voice cool but not unfriendly. "Just reviewing the system outputs," David replied, turning his chair to face her. "Everything's running smoothly." Zarella nodded but didn't say anything right away. Instead, she walked to the large window at the back of the lab, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape of Zetra. The twin moons were rising over the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the metallic buildings. After a moment of silence, she spoke again, her tone more serious. "You've done well, David, better than I expected, but there's something you should know." David felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her voice, something that hinted at the weight of what was about to be revealed. "The energy project," Zarella continued, her gaze still fixed on the skyline. "It's only the beginning. Zillaris has much bigger plans, and they involve more than just powering planets." David frowned. What do you mean? Zarella turned to face him, her sharp features illuminated by the soft light. Her eyes were intense, piercing, and for the first time, David saw something behind her usual mask of authority, a flicker of vulnerability, or perhaps regret. This planet, Zetra, and the systems we've been working on, they are part of a larger network, Zarella explained. Zilarus is expanding its influence across the galaxy, but it's not just about energy, it's about control. David leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Control of what? Everything, Zarella said simply. The energy we've harnessed here is only the first step. Zilarus is using it to power a new kind of technology, one that can manipulate matter at a molecular level. If they succeed, they'll be able to rewrite the rules of the universe itself. David's heart raced. He had suspected that there was more to the project than they had been told, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Manipulating matter at a molecular level, it sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but the way Zarella spoke about it made it clear that it was real. What do they plan to do with it? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zarella hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. They want to create a new kind of weapon, one that can control entire worlds without the need for an army. They're developing the technology here on Zetra, and the energy project was just the first phase. Once the system is fully operational, they'll be able to deploy it across the galaxy. David felt a knot form in his stomach. This was far worse than he had imagined. If what Zarella was saying was true, Zilarus wasn't just developing new technology, they were preparing for galactic domination. Why are you telling me this? David asked, meeting her gaze. Why now? Zarella's expression softened, and for the first time, David saw a glimpse of the person behind the cold, calculating exterior. Because I need your help. You've proven yourself to be more than just an engineer. You're resourceful, capable, and I believe you can be trusted. David stared at her, trying to process everything she was telling him. He had come to Zetra to advance his career, but now it seemed that he had stumbled into something much bigger, something that could change the course of history. And now, Zarella was asking him to take sides in a conflict that could determine the fate of entire planets. You want me to stop them, David said slowly, piecing together the implications of her words. Zarella nodded, her gaze unwavering. Zilarus is too powerful. If they succeed, no one will be able to stand against them. I've seen what they're capable of, and I can't let that happen. But I can't do it alone. David's mind raced. He had always considered himself a by-the-book professional, someone who followed orders and did his job to the best of his ability. But this was different. This was a fight for something bigger than himself. If Zilarus truly intended to use the technology for control, then the entire galaxy was at risk. And what happens if we fail? David asked, his voice low. Zarella's expression darkened. Then Zilarus will have the power to reshape the galaxy in their image. They'll control everything, resources, economies, entire populations. No one will be able to resist them. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had come to Zetra for a challenge, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. And yet, as he looked at Zarella, he realized that he couldn't walk away. He had a choice to make, and it wasn't just about his career anymore. I'm in, David said, his voice steady. Whatever it takes, I'll help you. Zarella's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, David saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. Good. We don't have much time. Over the next few days, David found himself pulled deeper into Zarella's plan. Together, they began to uncover the full extent of Zilarus's ambitions, piecing together the scattered fragments of information they had gathered. The energy project had been only the first step in a much larger scheme, one that involved manipulating entire planetary ecosystems and controlling the natural resources of entire worlds. The technology Zilarus was developing, what they called a matter control system, was unlike anything David had ever seen. It had the potential to reshape planets, turning barren worlds into thriving ecosystems or stripping them of life entirely. The implications were staggering, and the more David learned, the more he realized how dangerous it was. But it wasn't just the technology that concerned him. It was the people behind it, powerful individuals within Zilurus who were willing to go to any lengths to see their plans succeed. They operated in the shadows, their motives hidden behind layers of corporate bureaucracy and political maneuvering. And as David and Zarella dug deeper, they began to realize just how far-reaching the conspiracy went. Late one night, as they worked together in the dimly lit lab, David turned to Zarella. "What's the next step?" Zarella glanced at him, her expression grim. "We need to find out who's pulling the strings. There's someone high up in the corporation, someone powerful, who's orchestrating all of this. If we can expose them, we might have a chance to stop this before it's too late." David nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. They were up against forces far more powerful than they could have imagined, but they had no choice but to move forward. The future of the galaxy depended on it. As they continued their work, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Zilurus's plans were already in motion, and the window to stop them was closing fast. The deepening conspiracy. The air on Zetra seemed colder as David and Zarella delved deeper into the murky depths of the Zilurus Corporation. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous their mission became. It wasn't just about stopping a new technology anymore. It was about unmasking the powerful forces manipulating the future of the galaxy. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a deadly abyss, and David had the growing sense that they were running out of time. In the weeks that followed their pact to stop Zilurus, David found himself constantly looking over his shoulder. Zarella had warned him of the corporation's reach. They were dealing with an organization that spanned planets, with resources and influence that rivaled entire governments. If Zilurus caught wind of their plans, there would be no second chances. David worked closely with Zarella, both of them navigating the razor-thin line between their day jobs and their secret mission. While David was still officially leading the energy project, he found himself less and less concerned with the technical details of the work. The real battle was happening in the shadows, where every decision could be the difference between success and disaster. One night, long after the other employees had left the massive Zilurus headquarters, David met Zarella in a quiet, hidden room deep within the building, a place she had shown him, far away from prying eyes. The room had a faint hum of technology, with walls lined with holographic data displays and hidden communication arrays that Zarella used to tap into the vast corporate network. It was their base of operations for their covert activities, a place where they could speak freely. As the doors slid shut behind him, Zarella turned from the console, her face bathed in the soft blue light of the displays. "I've intercepted some information," she said, her voice low. "There's a high-level meeting happening tomorrow. All of the major players will be there, including the one we need to expose." David frowned as he stepped closer to the glowing screens, scanning the information laid out before him. "You think we'll find the mastermind behind all of this at the meeting?" Zarella nodded, her eyes narrowing. "I'm sure of it. But we need to be careful. This isn't just some board meeting. This is where decisions are made that can shape the fate of entire worlds. If we're going to stop them, we need more than just evidence. We need leverage." David felt a knot of tension tighten in his chest. Leverage? Against Zilurus? We're talking about one of the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. What kind of leverage do you think we could get? Zarella's gaze sharpened. "We need proof that they're planning to weaponize the technology. Not just rumors or reports, something concrete, something undeniable. If we can expose the true extent of their plans, we'll have a chance to rally opposition, not just within the corporation, but across the galaxy. There are planetary governments, independent systems, and even other corporations that would rise up if they knew what Zilurus was really planning." David stared at her, the enormity of what she was suggesting sinking in. They weren't just trying to stop a project. They were trying to bring down a corporate empire. He had known this was bigger than any normal job, but now the full scale of what they were doing hit him like a tidal wave. How do we get that proof? He asked after a moment, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his doubts. Zarella's lips pressed into a thin line. That's where things get dangerous. The meeting tomorrow will be heavily guarded, physically and digitally. There's no way we can simply walk in and start recording conversations. But I have access to some older security codes, backdoors in their system that I used before I became an executive. It won't be easy, but if we can get in undetected, we'll have a chance to tap into the internal comms and download the encrypted files we need. David's mind raced as he considered the risks. It was a bold plan, but it also meant placing their lives in danger. If they were caught, there would be no mercy. Zillaris wasn't known for tolerating betrayal, and David knew that if they failed, they'd be erased from the corporate records, disappearing like so many others who had crossed the wrong people. How do we know those security codes will still work? He asked, narrowing his gaze. Zarella allowed a brief smile to play at the corner of her lips. I still have some pull here, David. Besides, the codes are from a time when I was much lower in the ranks. They've upgraded security since then, but these old backdoors are the kind they never expect anyone to remember. It'll work. It has to. David exhaled slowly, nodding. All right. I trust you. What's the plan? Zarella moved to the console, pulling up schematics of the Zillaris headquarters and overlaying them with complex layers of security measures. The meeting is in the highest-level conference room, on the 97th floor of the corporate tower. There are biometric scans, retinal locks, and a constant AI security watch in the building. But here, she pointed to a small service elevator tucked away in the corner of the schematics, is a maintenance route that bypasses the primary security grid. It's old and mostly forgotten, but if we can access it, we'll be able to get into the building without triggering alarms. David leaned in, studying the map. And once we're inside, we'll need to reach the secondary security hub on the 85th floor, Zarella continued. From there, I can disable the AI surveillance in the meeting room. That will give us about 15 minutes to access the comm system, download the files, and get out. But we have to move fast. David's mind spun with the details. And if something goes wrong? Zarella's gaze darkened. Then we improvise. But whatever happens, we can't get caught. The next day arrived too quickly. David barely slept, his mind filled with thoughts of what they were about to do. Every scenario played out in his head. What if the codes didn't work? What if the AI caught them? What if they were walking into a trap? But he pushed those thoughts aside as he prepared. There was no room for hesitation now. Late that afternoon, he and Zarella made their move. Disguised as maintenance workers, they slipped into the building unnoticed, their forged credentials granting them temporary access to the service elevator. The ride up to the 85th floor was tense, neither of them speaking as the elevator hummed softly. David's pulse quickened with every passing second. When the doors opened, they found themselves in a dimly lit hallway, the sterile scent of the corporate tower filling the air. Zarella led the way, her movements quick and precise. They reached the security hub without incident, and she immediately began working at the console, her fingers flying across the holographic display. David stood guard, his heart pounding as he watched the hallway for any sign of danger. The minutes dragged by like hours. Got it? Zarella whispered, the soft hum of the AI surveillance system powering down. We've got 15 minutes. Let's go. They made their way to the 97th floor, slipping into the shadows just outside the conference room. David could hear the muffled voices of high-ranking Zillaris executives inside, their conversation calm and deliberate. It was unnerving, knowing that these people were casually discussing the future of the galaxy as if it were just another business deal. Zarella nodded to David, and he quickly connected his data tablet to the hidden comms port near the door. His hands trembled slightly as he began downloading the encrypted files, the progress bar moving agonizingly slow. Hurry, Zarella whispered, her eyes scanning the hallway. David's fingers moved faster, his heart pounding in his chest. Just a little more. Suddenly, a soft ping echoed from his tablet. Done, David breathed, disconnecting the device. But as they turned to leave, a voice from behind them froze them in place. Leaving so soon? David's blood turned to ice. He turned slowly to see a figure standing in the shadows, a tall, imposing man in a dark suit, his face hidden beneath the dim lighting. His voice was calm, almost amused, but there was a deadly edge to it. "You really thought you could outsmart Zilurus?" the man said, stepping forward, his face finally coming into view. His eyes were cold, calculating. "I'm afraid you've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." David's heart raced, his mind scrambling for a way out. They had been caught, and now there was no turning back. The betrayal. The air in the hallway felt thick, as if every molecule had become laden with tension. David's muscles tensed, his mind scrambling for a way to respond to the man standing before them. The stranger's cold gaze pierced through the dim light, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile that sent a chill down David's spine. His voice, calm yet cutting, sliced through the silence like a blade. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" the man said, his hands clasped behind his back as he slowly approached. His movements were deliberate, as if he already knew there was no escape for them. David felt the weight of the situation crash down on him. They had been careful, meticulous even, but it was clear now that Zilurus was always 2 steps ahead. He glanced at Zarella, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with determination. She stood her ground, her posture tense but unyielding. There was something about the way she was looking at the man that struck David as odd, something more than just fear or anger. It was as if she recognized him. The man stopped a few feet away from them, his eyes darting between David and Zarella. "I'm impressed," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You got further than most. But you should have known there's no hiding from us. Not here, not anywhere." David's mind raced. Who was this man? How had they been discovered so quickly? His pulse pounded in his ears, and he had to force himself to remain calm. Panicking would get them nowhere. Zarella was the first to speak, her voice cold and controlled. "So, it's you. I should have known." The man raised an eyebrow. "Ah, so you do remember me. Good. I'd hate to think I wasn't memorable." David's heart skipped a beat. She knew him. His eyes flicked to Zarella, searching her expression for answers, but she kept her gaze locked on the man, her face set in a mask of defiance. "Who is he?" David asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Zarella didn't take her eyes off the man. "His name is Malek. He's one of Zilurus's top enforcers, but that's just the surface of it." Malek smirked, clearly amused by her description. "Oh, Zarella, you always had such a way with words. But I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've always been one of our brightest. Pity it had to end this way." David's stomach churned. There was something more to this. Zarella and Malek had a history, one that was far deeper than just professional rivalry. The way they spoke to each other, the unspoken tension between them, it all pointed to a past that David hadn't been aware of. Zarella's voice hardened. "You don't have to do this, Malek. You don't have to be their lapdog." Malek's smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "Don't be naive. You know as well as I do that there's no escaping Zilurus. You think you can bring them down. Expose their secrets and walk away unscathed. No one does. You're either with them or you're nothing." David clenched his fists, anger flaring inside him. "So what now? You're just going to turn us in? Let them wipe us out like we never existed?" Malek's gaze shifted to David, and his smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Turn you in? No, that would be too predictable. You see, Zilurus doesn't care about loose ends. They care about loyalty. And right now, you have something that interests them." David's breath caught in his throat. Something that interests them. His mind raced through all the possibilities, the stolen data, the access they had gained to Zilurus's systems, but nothing made sense. Why hadn't Malek already sounded the alarm? Why was he standing here, talking, when he could have easily called in the full force of Zillara's security. Zarella seemed to sense the same thing. "What are you playing at, Malik? If you were going to arrest us, you'd have done it by now. What do you want?" Malik's smile widened. "I want what everyone at Zillara's wants, power. And you, Zarella, have put yourself in a very interesting position. You've been playing both sides for too long, and now it's time to choose." David blinked, confusion mixing with the fear swirling inside him. "Both sides? What is he talking about?" Zarella's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Malik chuckled softly. "Oh, dear David, you didn't think Zarella was just another corporate executive, did you? She's been feeding us information for years, ensuring her rise to power while keeping one foot out of the shadows. But now that little balancing act has come to an end." David's mind reeled. "What? No, that can't be true." Zarella shot Malik a withering glare. "Shut up, Malik." But it was too late. The damage had been done. David stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard. Could it really be true? Had Zarella been playing a game all along? He had trusted her, believed that they were fighting against Zillara's together. But now, Malik took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "It's simple, really. Zarella's been leaking information to keep herself in the corporation's good graces, even while trying to dismantle it from the inside. But now that you're involved, David, things have gotten messy. You see, you weren't part of the plan. You're just a tool she's been using to achieve her own goals." David felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He turned to Zarella, his heart pounding. "Is that true?" Zarella's eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Regret? It was hard to tell. She opened her mouth to speak, but Malik cut her off. "Don't bother, Zarella. It's over. You're out of time. The only question left is whether you'll take the fall alone, or if you'll drag David down with you." David felt sick. He had been used. Everything he thought he had been fighting for, the mission, the plan to expose Zillara's, it had all been twisted into something far more selfish. But even as the anger surged inside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Zarella finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with tension. "Yes, I've played both sides. But not for the reasons Malik wants you to believe. I've been feeding them just enough to keep them off my trail, but everything I've done has been to bring them down. I wasn't just working for myself, David. I was protecting you, protecting us." Malik laughed darkly. "Oh, how noble. Always the hero, aren't you, Zarella? But that doesn't change the fact that you lied. To everyone, including him." David's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to believe Zarella, to trust that she had been fighting for the same cause all along. But another part of him, one that had grown more cynical during his time on Zetra, wasn't so sure. "Why didn't you tell me?" David asked, his voice breaking the silence. Zarella's gaze softened, and for the first time since they'd started working together, David saw something real in her eyes. Something raw and unguarded. "I couldn't risk it," she said quietly. "I couldn't risk losing your trust. Not when I needed you the most." Malik shook his head, his expression full of mock pity. "Touching. But it doesn't matter now. Zarella, you have a choice. You can come with me and face whatever punishment Zillara's has in store for traitors like you, or I can let David go, and we pretend none of this ever happened. But you know what they'll do to him if he's caught up in this." David's pulse quickened. It was a trap, but Malik had laid it out with such precision that David could see the lines being drawn. He was giving Zarella a way out, but only at the cost of her life, or at the cost of betraying him completely. Zarella stared at Malik, her jaw clenched, her fists tightening at her sides. She was calculating, weighing the options, her mind racing through the scenarios. David could see the war playing out in her head, the battle between survival and sacrifice. Malik leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "What will it be, Zarella? Your life or his?" The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. David felt like the walls were closing in, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a vice. Zorella's lips parted, her breath shallow. Her eyes flicked to David, and in that moment he saw the truth. She was going to choose. And it wasn't going to be him. Just as the words began to form on her lips, David's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he lunged toward Malik, his hands grabbing for the data tablet still in his jacket. He wasn't going to wait for Zorella to choose. He wasn't going to let Malik decide their fate. In one fluid motion, he slammed the tablet against the side of Malik's head. The man staggered, his expression flashing from smug confidence to shocked disbelief as he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. David stood over him, breathing hard, his hands shaking from the adrenaline. Zorella stared at him, wide-eyed, as if she hadn't expected him to act. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Zorella broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "We have to go, now." David nodded, his heart still pounding in his chest. He didn't know if he could trust her anymore, but he didn't have a choice. They had to escape together. As they fled down the corridor, the weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. The stakes had never been higher, and David knew that the path ahead would only get darker. But one thing was certain, he wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game anymore. He was going to take control, escape into the shadows. David's pulse thundered in his ears as he and Zorella sprinted down the deserted corridor of the Zillaris Tower. The sterile, metallic walls seemed to stretch endlessly before them, their footsteps echoing through the silence. Malik lay unconscious behind them, but David knew it was only a matter of time before someone found him, or worse, before he woke up. Zorella led the way, her movements precise and unyielding. Despite everything that had been revealed, David found himself following her without hesitation. He didn't have much of a choice. They were both marked now, fugitives in a labyrinth of corporate power, and there was no way out except forward. The betrayal still hung heavy in the air between them, unspoken but simmering just beneath the surface. David's mind raced with questions, with doubts. Had Zorella really been protecting him all along, or had she simply used him as another piece in her complex web of deception? He had trusted her, believed in the mission they had been working toward together, but now everything felt tainted. Still, he couldn't deny the reality of the situation. Zillaris was after them both, and if they didn't make it out of the tower, none of it would matter. As they rounded a corner, Zorella slowed her pace, glancing over her shoulder at David. Her face was set in a mask of determination, but David could see the strain behind her eyes. She was tired, just like he was, tired of running, tired of hiding, but neither of them had the luxury of stopping now. "We're close," Zorella said, her voice low but steady. "There's an old service tunnel up ahead that leads to the lower levels. It's not on any of the modern schematics, so we should be able to avoid the main security routes." David nodded, but his mind was still swirling. He couldn't help but voice the question that had been gnawing at him since their confrontation with Malik. "Why didn't you tell me the truth, Zorella? About everything? About you playing both sides?" Zorella slowed her pace, her expression hardening. "Because I couldn't afford for you to lose faith in me. We needed each other, David, and I couldn't risk you walking away." "Walking away?" David's voice was incredulous. "I'm not the one who's been feeding Zillaris information and lying about it." Zorella stopped abruptly and whirled to face him, her eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and something else, regret, maybe. "You think I enjoyed this? You think I wanted to live every day wondering if today would be the day they figured out what I was really doing? I had to play their game, David. It was the only way to survive, the only way to gather enough information to take them down." David took a step back, his anger cooling slightly as he tried to understand. "You could have told me," he said, his voice quieter now. "You could have trusted me." Zorella's gaze softened, and for a moment her guard dropped. "I did trust you. More than you know. But this," she gestured around them, to the sterile walls, the constant surveillance, the endless layers of deception, "this is bigger than both of us. I've spent years building the trust of people like Malik, years pretending to be one of them. If I slipped, even for a second, it would all come crashing down. David ran a hand through his hair, trying to wrap his head around it all. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that she had been on his side the whole time, but doubt still lingered at the edges of his thoughts. How much of this was real, and how much had been calculated? Zarella seemed to sense his hesitation, her voice softening further. David, I've made mistakes. I won't deny that. But everything I've done to protect you. To protect us. I need you to believe that. David searched her face for any hint of deception, but all he saw was exhaustion and sincerity. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she had been playing both sides out of necessity, not out of greed or selfish ambition. Before he could respond, a sudden sharp noise echoed down the corridor, a mechanical whir, followed by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. David's heart jumped into his throat. Someone was coming. Move, Zarella hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. They sprinted down the corridor again, their footsteps faster, more urgent. David's lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The whirring sound grew louder behind them, and he knew they didn't have much time. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor, where a large, rusted hatch was set into the floor. Zarella knelt down and began working the manual release lever, her fingers moving quickly but precisely. David glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding in his chest as the sound of the approaching footsteps grew closer. They were almost on them. Hurry, he urged, his voice tight with fear. Zarella gave the lever one final pull, and the hatch creaked open with a loud groan. Without a second thought, David jumped down into the darkness below, landing hard on the metal floor of the tunnel beneath. Zarella followed quickly, slamming the hatch shut behind her just as the footsteps reached the end of the corridor above them. David held his breath, his body tensed, listening to the muffled voices and footsteps above. For a moment, it seemed like they were going to be discovered, but after what felt like an eternity, the sounds began to fade and the footsteps moved away. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, slumping against the cold wall of the tunnel. Zarella stood beside him, her breathing heavy but controlled. That was too close, David muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Zarella nodded, her eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. We're not out of the woods yet. This tunnel will take us to one of the old maintenance shafts that leads outside the building, but after that, we're on our own. David stood, shaking off the exhaustion that weighed on him. Do you have a plan for what happens next? Or are we just going to keep running until we get caught? Zarella's expression hardened again, but there was a glint of determination in her eyes. No, we're not running anymore. There's someone we need to meet, someone who can help us take down Zilorist once and for all. David frowned. Who? A contact of mine, Zarella said, her voice low. Someone who's been working against Zilorist from the shadows for years. They have resources, information, and most importantly, they have leverage. If we can get to them, we'll have a fighting chance. David wanted to ask more questions, but there wasn't time. The tunnel stretched out before them, dark and foreboding, but it was their only way out. He followed Zarella as she led the way, her steps quick and sure, though David could tell by the way her shoulders tensed that she was just as nervous as he was. The tunnel was long, winding its way beneath the tower like a forgotten artery. Dust and debris littered the floor, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. As they walked, the air grew colder, and David could feel the weight of the underground pressing down on them. It was as if they were walking through the belly of a giant beast, one that had long since been abandoned. After what felt like hours, they reached the end of the tunnel, where a rusted metal ladder led up to another hatch. Zarella climbed first, her movements quick and agile despite the fatigue that had to be creeping into her muscles. David followed, wincing as the cold metal bit into his hands. When they reached the top, Zarella paused, pressing her ear against the hatch to listen for any signs of danger. After a tense moment, she nodded and pushed it open, revealing the faint glow of streetlights from above. They emerged in a narrow alleyway behind the Zillerus Tower, the sound of the city humming all around them. The towering skyscrapers loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the street, and the faint smell of burning fuel hung in the air. David pulled his collar up against the chill as Zarella led him out of the alley and into the bustling streets. The city was alive with activity, despite the late hour. Hovercars zipped by overhead, and pedestrians moved through the neon-lit streets with purpose. No one paid them any attention, but David couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Zarella pulled her hood up, blending into the crowd. "We need to move quickly," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the street. "Our contact is waiting for us in the underground markets. It's the only place we'll be safe." David nodded, his mind racing as they slipped through the crowd. The underground markets, he had heard about them during his time on Zetra, though he had never been. They were a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, and those who operated outside the law. If there was anywhere on the planet where they could find allies willing to stand against Zillerus, it was there. As they made their way through the crowded streets, David couldn't help but wonder what kind of person Zarella's contact was. Someone with the resources and information they needed to take down Zillerus would be powerful and dangerous. But at this point, they didn't have much of a choice. They reached the entrance to the underground markets just as the sky overhead began to turn a faint shade of violet, signaling the approach of dawn. Zarella paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd one last time before turning to David. "Once we go in, there's no turning back," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the decision they were about to make. "Are you ready for this?" David met her gaze, the doubts and fear still swirling inside him. But one thing had become clear. They were in too deep to walk away now. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. Without another word, Zarella led him down the steps into the underground, where the shadows of their past and the weight of the future awaited them.